He had power, money, and influence. But the one thing he didn't have was someone who would dare to say no. Nathan Reed wasn't used to losing. He didn't lose in meetings, in negotiations, or in love. He owned the game because he made the rules. At 34, he was a tech billionaire in Austin, Texas. The kind of man who signed seven-figure deals while sipping his morning espresso. But even kings get bored. That's why. Corner booth of a McDonald's? Not exactly his natural habitat. Across from him was his best friend and lifelong instigator, Derek Sloan, sipping a vanilla shake with the smugness of someone about to start trouble. "You've done it all, Nate," Derek said, grinning. "Except fall for someone who doesn't care who you are." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What's your point? I bet you couldn't marry someone like her." Derek nodded subtly toward the counter. Nathan followed his gaze. There she was, a young woman in a McDonald's visor and apron, hair pulled back, sleeves slightly stained with grease. She was balancing a tray in one hand while wiping a table with the other. Exhausted, efficient, invisible. To almost everyone in the room, except Nathan. "You're joking," he said. "Nope. Marry her, no prenup? No loopholes, and I'll wire you $2 million. "You've got 6 months," Nathan smirked. The money meant nothing but the challenge. Now that meant everything. He leaned back, eyes still on the girl in red and yellow. Game on. Nathan returned to the same McDonald's the next afternoon. No suit, no chauffeur. Just jeans, a t-shirt, and a glint in his eye. He didn't normally do this, whatever this was. But something about her, about the way she moved, completely unbothered by the chaos around her, stuck in his head. She wasn't trying to be noticed. That made her impossible to ignore. She was at the register today, focused on entering an order, while simultaneously calming a toddler screaming in line behind her. Her name tag read, Emily. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the counter, flashing his signature half-smile. "Hi there." She didn't look up. "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you?" He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to be heard above the fryer hiss. "What do you recommend? ... besides the view." Now she looked up and blinked once. "No offense," she said, "but if you're trying to flirt, we're out of fries, not dignity." Nathan laughed genuinely. "Fair enough. I'll just take a coffee then." Black, she nodded, rang it up, and moved on. No blush. No curiosity, it rattled him. He took his coffee and sat at a table near the back, pretending to scroll his phone while watching her work. She moved like someone with no time to waste and no interest in being seen, to things that made her fascinating. An hour later, as she wiped tables, he tried again. "You always this focused?" She shrugged. "When you're raising a daughter alone, focus isn't optional." "A daughter?" Nathan leaned back, smiling to himself. Well, this was going to be more interesting than he thought. He told himself it was strategy, just another game, a challenge, nothing more. But Nathan found himself returning to that same McDonald's every other day. Same table, same black coffee, same woman who barely looked at him unless she had to. Emily, she had a rhythm work. Wipe, refill, repeat. She didn't smile much, but when she did, like when a kid thanked her without being prompted, it was real. On day 5, Nathan brought a coloring book. Not for Emily, for her daughter. He'd overheard her name was Grace, and that she loved dinosaurs. So he found a Jurassic-themed activity pad and left it at the counter after ordering. Emily returned it to his table minutes later. "Thanks," she said, dry as die-old toast. "But we're not interested in charity." Nathan lifted his cup. "Then think of it as a peace offering." She stared at him for a beat too long, then placed the book beside him. Peace comes from honesty, not gestures. Then she walked away. Nathan blinked. He was used to rejection in deals, not in life. Especially not from someone who probably made less in a week than his shoes were worth. And yet she fascinated him. It's not because she was poor or different or a prize to win, but because she didn't care who he was. Couldn't buy her time. Couldn't dazzle her, and in his world, that made her rare that night. Nathan looked at the bet text chain from Derek and typed, "Game on." This will be easier than you think. But as he hit send, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind, because for the first time, he wasn't sure he was the one playing her. It took 3 more visits before she said yes, not to a date, just a coffee. 15 minutes. 1 break. That's all, Emily had muttered after her shift, wiping her hands on her apron. Don't make me regret it. They sat outside a cafe across the parking lot from McDonald's. The sun was low, painting everything in soft gold. Nathan looked perfectly out of place in his casual blazer and watch that cost more than most people's rent. Emily, still in uniform, looked like she couldn't decide if she was being ambushed or bored. So Nathan began, "Do you always work this hard?" She sipped her drink without looking at him. "Do you always try this hard?" He smirked. "Only when I'm interested." She finally met his eyes. "Why me?" He blinked. It was a simple question. Obvious even. But no one had ever asked him. That with sincerity, women usually assumed they were chosen. Emily wanted a reason. "I don't know," he admitted. "You're different, that's vague. You don't seem impressed." She set her cup down. "Maybe that's because I'm not." Nathan let out a low laugh, refreshing. But she didn't laugh. "This isn't a game to me," she said. "I don't have time to be someone's distraction." The words stung because they were true. It approached her like a side quest, a trophy to win. But sitting across from her now, watching her eyes flash with clarity and exhaustion, Nathan realized something terrifying. He didn't want to win anymore. He wanted her to stay. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know how. The second time he saw Grace, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the McDonald's break room. Her babysitter canceled and had no choice but to bring her in during a short shift. Grace didn't complain, just sat quietly, scribbling. Nathan had come to accidentally bump into Emily again, but the moment he saw the little girl, everything shifted. She had wild curly hair, jelly stains on her cheeks, and a spark in her eye that didn't belong to someone who'd known struggle. She looked up at him. "You look like someone who doesn't like dinosaurs." He blinked. "Excuse me?" Grace narrowed her eyes. "You have that face? The I'm too busy for fun face?" Nathan chuckled. "Well, I used to like them. You forgot," she declared. "You need to remember." And she handed him one of her napkin drawings, a green T-Rex with uneven teeth. "It's you," she said, "but happier." Emily walked in right then, saw the scene, and froze. Grace handing her art to a man she barely knew. Nathan, staring at it like it was a signed Picasso. "I hope she's not bothering you," Emily said, a bit too fast. Nathan looked up. "She's kind of amazing." Emily raised an eyebrow. He stood, smoothing his shirt. You raise her on your own?" Emily nodded slowly. "Since day one." He looked back at Grace, now humming and drawing another creature. Then back at the woman who somehow carried exhaustion and strength in the same breath. For the first time, Nathan wasn't sure who he was more fascinated by, the little girl with crayon confidence ... or the mother who kept her world spinning. Nathan. Reed knew control. It was the currency of his life, more valuable than money, more intoxicating than success. But something about Emily Ann now. Grace was beginning to unravel that grip. It wasn't just the coffee chats, or the way Grace called his name without hesitation. It was the quiet moments that followed him home. The way Emily never asked for anything. The way she listened with her eyes instead of her mouth. The way she didn't try to impress because she didn't think he was worth the effort. And that ... was exactly why he couldn't stop thinking about her. One evening, Nathan found himself driving past McDonald's even when he had no intention of stopping. He just sat in the parking lot, staring at the glow of fluorescent lights and thinking of Emily wiping down trays while humming under her breath, in a world full of people trying to be seen. She lived like someone who was used to being ignored. But not by him, not anymore. He texted Derek that night, "I'm ahead of schedule. This might be the easiest $2 million I've ever made." But as soon as he hit send, something inside twisted, because the truth. He hadn't thought about the bet in days, when Grace handed him a new drawing of him. Emily, and her standing under a badly drawn rainbow, he didn't see a win. He saw a world he wanted to belong to. A world where a burnt grilled cheese sandwich meant love, where someone laughed at his dad jokes, where a woman didn't care about his empire. And that terrified him more than any boardroom ever had. Because for once, Nathan Reed wasn't playing to win. He was afraid he might already be losing to something real. There was no ring, no speech, no perfect moment. Just a Thursday afternoon, the smell of fries in the air, and Grace asleep in the back seat of his car after school. Emily was sitting next to him on a park bench, sipping coffee from a paper cup. She looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from work. This was soul deep. A woman carrying more than just hours on her feet. Nathan watched her from the corner of his eye, then stared straight ahead. "I've been thinking," he said. Quietly, "That's dangerous," she muttered, half smiling. He chuckled. "Probably. But I still need to ask you something." She turned to him, guarded. "What is it?" A pause. Then, without flourish, "Marry me." Double quotes, silence. The birds kept chirping. Cars passed. Grace snored softly in the back seat. Emily blinked. "Is this a joke?" He shook his head. "I'm serious. I know we come from different planets, but I want to try, for real." She stared at him like he'd grown another head. "You barely know me? I know enough to want more." Emily looked away, jaw clenched. "I have a daughter, Nathan. This isn't just about feelings. It's about her future." No. "I want to be part of that." Another pause. "I'm not a prize, and I'm not your redemption story. I'm not asking you to fix me," he said, voice low. "But I'm asking if we can build something better. Together." She looked at him. Again. This time, the fight in her eyes softened just a little. "For Grace's sake," she said, almost whispering, "I'll think about it." And that was more than he'd expected. Maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something real. There were no violins, no white doves, no all lined with flowers. Just a city courthouse, a waiting room with flickering lights, and a sleepy 5-year-old fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Emily wore light blue, her only nice outfit. Nathan wore a suit, not too expensive, but still too formal for a room that smelled like printer ink and faint regret. When the judge asked if they were ready, neither of them smiled. They just nodded. The vows were short. The ring was plain. The kiss was polite. And just like that, they were husband and wife. Outside, Grace clapped with glee. "Now we're a real family." Nathan smiled at her. But when he glanced at Emily, he saw something else distant. She looked happy for her daughter, not for herself. They celebrated with chicken nuggets and milkshakes at the same McDonald's where it all began. A full circle, perhaps, but not the magical kind. Back at Nathan's home Hillcrest Manor, as the world knew it, Grace ran through the massive hallway like she'd entered a castle. Emily didn't run. She stood by the front door, shoes still on, eyes scanning the marble floors like she was searching for something solid. "You okay?" Nathan asked. She looked up. "This doesn't feel real." He stepped closer. "It is. It's just different." She nodded, but didn't step further into the house. And that night, they slept in separate rooms, because in this kind of fairy tale, the wedding wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of a quiet war. Between comfort and connection, a battle neither of them yet knew how to fight. The mansion was too. It's quiet, not peaceful, empty. Every sound seemed to echo. Grace's soft footsteps, the creak of leather chairs, the quiet click of doors that never used to close behind anyone. Emily tried to adjust. She made breakfast. She labeled drawers. She taught Grace how to use the intercom system, but still unplugged it at night. She didn't hate the house. She just didn't trust it. There was too much space for things to get lost, including feelings. Nathan, for his part, tried to settle in with her, as if that were a natural part of marriage. He left flowers on her nightstand, left the dining table set for 3, left space in his world but not always in his time, because while she was packing school lunches, he was packing for a board meeting. While she was folding Grace's laundry, he was folding deals across the globe, and yet he cared. She could see that. In his awkward efforts to connect, in the way he tried to talk to Grace about cartoons, despite not knowing a single character name, but the warmth wasn't there, not yet. One evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Emily sat alone in the guest room, still refusing to sleep in Nathan's wing of the house. He knocked quietly. "Can I come in?" She nodded. He stood in the doorway, hands in pockets. "I'm trying." "I know," she said, eyes down. "I just don't know if it's enough." She looked up. "Neither do I." They didn't touch. Didn't argue. Didn't cry. They just existed. Two people bound by a ring, a child, and a bet neither dared to speak aloud. And the silence between them said the most. This was not love. Not yet. But something was trying to grow in the middle of all that space. Something real. Nathan wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for tax write-offs. That's how it started. A quiet afternoon in his home office, reviewing financial reports and acquisition history. His assistant had sent over archived files from older business moves routine. Clean up for quarterly audits. But one folder stopped him. Redstone. Textiles facility closure 5Y archive. He clicked. Up came a PDF. Graphs. Financial breakdowns. Strategic. Memos. Then dash photos. One caught his attention. A grainy image of factory workers being dismissed. Rain-soaked cardboard boxes. Faces blurred with exhaustion. And in the corner, a young woman. Visor, ponytail, tired eyes. Nathan zoomed in. It was Emily. His throat tightened. He scanned the documents, his signature, his board approval. The closure had been hailed as a strategic pivot, cutting costs, boosting investor confidence. It saved the company millions. But for her, it had cost everything. No wonder she'd taken the job at McDonald's. No wonder she'd looked through him like glass that first day. Her life had been detoured by a pen stroke Nathan barely remembered making. He closed the laptop and leaned back. He wasn't just the man who had married her. Under false pretenses, he was the man who had dismantled her stability years before he ever knew her name. How do you apologize for damage done before you ever said hello? He stayed in that chair until night fell. His phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Bet expires in 12 days. She's still here. Almost there, champ. Nathan stared at the screen, heart heavy with something uglier than guilt. He hadn't just lied to Emily. He had built her tragedy. And now, he had to face a truth far worse than losing the bet. He never deserved her. From the very beginning, it should have been a normal evening. Spaghetti on the table, Grace drawing dinosaurs in crayon beside her plate, Emily laughing genuinely for the first time in days when Nathan burned the garlic bread. For a fleeting moment, they felt like a family. Then the doorbell rang. Nathan opened it to find Derek Sloan. Wearing that smirk that always meant trouble, was about to make itself comfortable. "Nice place," Derek said, stepping inside uninvited. "Domestic. Bliss looks good on you." Nathan stiffened. "What do you want?" Emily peeked around the corner. "Who's this?" Derek turned toward her with a grin too wide. "Ah, the bride. Lovely to meet you. I've heard so much." Nathan's jaw clenched. "Derek, don't." But Derek was already too far in. "I gotta say, Nate, didn't think you'd last this long. A bet's a bet, but you played the long game. Almost had me fooled." Emily's smile vanished. "What bet?" Nathan stepped forward. Emily, Derek held up his hands. "You mean he didn't tell you? Our little wager. 6 months to marry someone who'd never heard of him. You were perfect McDonald's. Single mom. Just enough struggle to make him look like a savior." Emily, when still, completely still, she turned to Nathan. "Tell me that's not true." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Tried again. It started that way," he whispered. "But it changed. I changed." Emily's voice dropped. "Did you know about Redstone too?" Silence. That was enough. She picked up Grace, who looked between the adults, confused and scared, and headed toward the door. "Emily, please." Nathan called. She didn't look back. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was unforgivable. Emily didn't slam the door. She didn't yell. Didn't cry. Didn't ask why. She just packed. Grace sat on the bed, hugging her stuffed dinosaur, watching her mother fold their lives into 2 old suitcases, like it was something she'd done before, because she had. This wasn't Emily's first goodbye. Just the deepest. Nathan stood by the doorway, helpless. Please, talk to me. She didn't look at him. You built my life on a bet. You broke it before you ever even knew my name. I didn't know about Redstone then, he said. I didn't know it was you. But you didn't care enough to find out, she replied. He took a step closer. Emily, I've changed. What we had was becoming real. That's the problem, she said, zipping the bag. You've got to become honest. I had to survive. Grace tugged on her mom's sleeve. Are we leaving the big house? Emily crouched down, her voice soft but steady. Yes, sweetie, but we're taking the best parts with us. She looked up at Nathan, and no, we're not taking the drawing. Nathan flinched. It was the one Grace had made. The rainbow, stick figure family. The first time he saw himself as part of something human, Emily lifted the suitcase. I don't need revenge, she said. I need peace. And with that, she walked out, no slamming doors. No final words. Just a quiet fall of footsteps and the closing of something sacred. Nathan stood in the silence, alone for the first time in years. Not alone in space, alone in truth. The mansion echoed now, not from sound, but from absence. No Grace humming cartoons in the hallway. No Emily clinking dishes in the kitchen. No laughter, just quiet. In memory, Nathan wandered through rooms he hadn't really lived in, touching picture frames that meant nothing. Sitting in chairs he never noticed were cold. He'd built this world from ambition, speed, and strategy, and now it all felt hollow. He stared at his phone. No calls, no texts. He called his lawyer. I want to dissolve my board position, he said, effective immediately. There was silence on the other end. Then, sir, are you sure? I've never been more sure. Within a week, Nathan sold his remaining shares, transferred control of his company, and left the business world that had once defined his identity. And then he drove, not to a beach, not to a board retreat, to Redstone. The factory was long gone, but the people remained. People he'd never met, people whose lives he depended with a signature. He met them, listened to them, sat in diners and living rooms and old union halls. He didn't try to explain. He didn't offer excuses. He just asked, how can I help now? They didn't hug him, didn't forgive him, but some of them nodded. It was a start. Nathan took his earnings and created a fund anonymous. No nameplates, no speeches, just quiet reparations. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was the first honest thing he'd done in a long time. That night, alone in a motel room with flickering lights, Nathan stared at Grace's old drawing rescued from the trash. A stick family. A rainbow. It was wrinkled now, torn, but he kept it, because for the first time, he finally understood what it cost to earn a place in someone else's picture. It took him 3 weeks to find her, not because she was hiding, but because she wasn't. Waiting, Emily had moved in with an old friend on the east side of town. Small place, 2 bedrooms. Backyard with a rusted swing. Quiet, normal. Nathan didn't bring flowers or a speech. He brought himself. And waited. He sat on the park bench across the street, morning after morning, same time Grace walked to school. Holding Emily's hand, the first day, Emily didn't look at him. The second day, she glanced. The third, she came over. You're persistent. She said, I'm learning to be consistent, he replied. She sat, leaving space between them. Why are you here? Sold everything I know, she said. The papers love a redemption headline. I'm not here for headlines. Emily studied him. He looked tired, unshaven. His clothes didn't match. Didn't even carry his phone. She asked quietly, what do you want? He paused. I want nothing, unless you offer it. That silenced her, he continued. I won't chase you. I won't push. But if there's a chance you ever feel safe enough to talk to, trust again, I'll be right here. Same bench, every Thursday. 5 p.m., Emily nodded once. no promises. She stood. Grace still draws you. That hit harder than any slap. She doesn't forgive you, but she doesn't erase you either. Nathan swallowed hard. That's more than I deserve. Emily didn't answer. She just walked away. But she left something behind, an empty space beside him. It didn't feel quite so cold anymore. It was the 6th Thursday. Emily showed up early. Nathan was already there, sitting on the same park bench, reading a book that looked untouched. Stood when he saw her, not out of obligation, but instinct. This time, she sat closer. Grace ran ahead, chasing pigeons. The sky was soft with sunset, kind of orange that made everything feel a little quieter. I've been watching, Emily said, eyes forward. Not just here. I talked to people in Redstone, saw the fund. The way you stayed anonymous. Nathan nodded. I didn't want it to be about me, he said. Emily turned to him. It was about you, because it finally wasn't. They sat in silence. Then Nathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Not a ring box, a folded napkin. Inside a drawing. A new one, Grace's latest. This time, there were 4 figures. 2 adults, 1 child, and a tiny baby in between. The rainbow was still there. But so was a caption, "Try again." Emily laughed. A sound that felt lighter than memory. Nathan met her eyes. I don't need a ceremony, or a photo, or an answer. Today, he unfolded another paper, his own this time. A handwritten note. 4 words. Will you marry me? No tricks, no bets. Just a man, holding out a question he would wait a lifetime to hear. Emily looked at the paper. Then, at him, I'm not promising easy, she whispered. I'm not asking for easy, he said. She reached out and took the note, and in that moment, second proposal didn't need applause. It only needed breath, trust, and time. They didn't rent a hall this time. No gold invitations, no champagne flutes. Tesh! Just a small backyard. A wooden arch decorated with paper flowers made by Grace, and 20 folding chairs borrowed from the community center. Nathan stood in a white shirt with sleeves rolled up, hair windblown, nervous like a boy at his first school recital. Emily wore a pale yellow dress. Nothing designer, just hers. Grace served as ring bearer, flower girl, and DJ all at once. With a Bluetooth speaker clipped to her belt and mismatched socks on her feet, the officiant, old neighbor who once taught Grace to ride her bike, asked if they wanted to say anything personal. Emily spoke first. I married you the first time out of fear. Fear that I'd never give Grace the life she deserved. Fear that I was saying no to help disguised as love. This time, she paused, looked up at Nathan. I'm here because I'm no longer afraid, and because I believe in who you've become. Nathan cleared his throat. I married you the first time because I thought I could win you this time. I know I can only earn you every day. Grace clapped. Loudly, they laughed through tears. The rings were simple bands, no diamonds, just silver. Just enough they kissed, no cheers. Just wind in the trees and the soft sound of paper petals falling to grass. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was theirs. And for the first time, Nathan didn't feel like a man who had conquered something. He felt like a man who had come home. It didn't happen in one moment. There was no dramatic hug, no teary-eyed daddy screamed across a playground. It happened in the small things. The way Grace handed him her backpack without asking. The way she called out, "Can you check my math?" Even though she already knew the answer. The way she reached for his hand when they crossed the street without looking. Nathan never tried to replace anyone. He didn't ask for titles. He just showed up. When she had a fever, he stayed by her bed all night, Googling how to cool down a child without waking them. When she got stage fright during her school play, he stood up and mouthed every line with her from the front row until she smiled. One Saturday morning, they were building a pillow fort in the living room. Grace looked at him with the blunt clarity only a 6-year-old could have. You're not just mommy's husband anymore. Oh, Nathan asked, adjusting a cushion. She nodded. You're ours now. He couldn't speak. He just pulled her close, hiding the welling in his eyes behind a laugh. From that day on, it didn't matter if he'd once been a stranger, or that their first drawing together had been crumpled in anger. What mattered was the new one hanging on the fridge now. Grace, her mom, Nathan, and a tiny figure in a stroller, added in crayon the night before. The caption above read, "My real family." The house was smaller now. 2 bedrooms, a creaky porch swing, a yard full of weeds that Nathan never quite got around to fixing. But it was home. And on a rainy Tuesday morning, Emily stood by the kitchen window, hands resting on her rounded belly. Watching Grace splash through puddles in a bright yellow raincoat, Nathan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her shoulder. "She's going to ruin those shoes." "She's already calling them her adventure boots," Emily smiled. He chuckled. "Of course she is." They stood in silence for a while, just breathing the same breath. No rush, no noise, no audience. "I still think about it sometimes," Nathan said. "The way it started?" Emily leaned into him. "Me too. But we don't live there anymore." "No," he whispered. "We don't." Later that evening, they all curled up on the couch, Grace between them, falling asleep mid-sentence as Nathan read aloud from her favorite book. Emily dozed off next to him, one hand on her stomach, the other still holding his. He looked at them both, and something settled in his chest. Not pride, not ownership. Peace. This wasn't the life he planned. It wasn't the one he bet on. It was the one he fought for after losing. And that made it real. As rain tapped against the windows and the house exhaled with warmth, Nathan closed the book and whispered to no one in particular. "Some stories don't end. They just begin again." True. True love doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with a choice. Nathan Reed had everything a man could want, except honesty with himself. His love story didn't start with romance. It started with a lie, with a bet, with ego. But what this story teaches us is that real love can still grow from something broken if we are brave enough to face the wreckage, own the damage, and rebuild brick by brick. Emily didn't need a savior. She needed truth. She didn't want someone to rescue her, Shay. Wanted someone who could stay. Long after the storm passed, and Nathan learned that apology isn't a sentence, it's a life lived differently. This story reminds us, people can change, not because they're asked to, but because they choose to. Because sometimes the most powerful kind of love isn't loud. It's quiet. It's consistent. It shows up. And it waits. So if you ever wonder whether redemption is possible, or whether love can be built again from the ruins, just remember, the first marriage was a bet. The second was a promise. And the third was a beginning. Choose love. Every time. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in second chances, in love that grows beyond mistakes, and in the power of becoming better, then don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have forgiven Graham? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the to never miss the next one. Because at life's stories, we believe that every broken heart deserves a new beginning.